I'm Meabh Smith. I work in medical physics and clinical engineering at Beaumont Hospital, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more broadly about wearables. So that's been a focus on the empathic embrace, and so I'm just going to talk about wearables that we might already be wearing ourselves here. So, and thinking about the role of wearables in epilepsy, is it all about seizure detection? The questions that I think we're all asking ourselves about the role of wearables. So the embrace empathic is about detecting seizures, but is it also about keeping you well? Is it useful for the person with epilepsy? Is it actually really useful, or is it just something that's generating a lot of data? But if it is useful, how can we make it useful? And that's why this project, there's going to be lots of learning from this project around the empathic embrace, because it'll also be a methodology that can be used to look at other wearables and not just the empathic. And so there'll be huge learning from really challenging new technology to see if it does what it says it's going to do, and is that a valuable thing. So it'd be great if wearables can anticipate a seizure. It's great to alert a caregiver and give a location, but I think there's huge value to be got in increasing a person's insight into their epilepsy or any illness or even general well-being, like when are you stressed. So one of the things, my own mother at the minute is pacemaker dependent, and her Apple Watch is being used quite a lot to keep an eye on her because there's issues with the pacemaker. So there's lots of value can be got, but you've got to dive into it, and I'll explain that as we go along. So there'd be huge value in having a reliable record of your seizures, especially when there's a change that happens, whether that's medication or some event in one's life or the leaving cert, something like that. And if there's a way to actually look at how the seizure profile is changing, because we know that journals, I think there's a lot of research to say the journals, for various reasons, aren't that reliable. And it'd be really good if there's a way to give a clinician more insight into a person's epilepsy. And that's a double-edged sword, because I have a cardiologist colleague who says every day people are sending him their ECGs from their wearables, and he's saying, well, what do they want me to do with it? So clinicians can also become inundated with data from the wearables, and that's not doing any favours to anybody. So there's a lot to be unpicked and untangled. So to get the value from wearables, it's not an easy thing to do. So as someone who wants to use, if you want to use a wearable to improve your health, you need to trust it. You need to trust where the data is, who can read the data. Does the device do what it's supposed to do? How does it measure? What does it measure? Does it measure it well? And how is that recorded? And like another thing that people say might be aware of, some of the watches that might, for example, take an ECG. If someone isn't feeling well beside you, you can give them your watch and record their ECG. So if a clinician looks at that, how do they know it's your data that they're looking at as well? So there's lots of challenges there. So this is a typical line from, if you Google wearables and epilepsy, there's huge, thousands and thousands of articles, journal articles. But this is a real typical line. Despite the rapid advancement of technology and the availability of new devices, the use of wearables in daily clinical epilepsy care remains rare, and its benefit is not adequately supported by evidence. And that's what this project wants to address. This project wants to find real, independent evidence to what is useful from a specific wearable. So Peter escaped this slide earlier, saying what the clinical working groups are saying about the value of wearables. And they're saying that clinically validated wearable devices are useful for automated detection of generalized tonic-clonic seizures and bifocal tonic-clonic seizures. So there is a real value in that. But the evidence in the literature, from a clinician perspective, the evidence is not terribly strong. There's huge work to do in this area. And they also say, that working group also says, that they don't recommend the clinical use of currently available wearable devices for seizure types other than the tonic-clonic seizures. So there's clearly a huge need for further research and development. And every device manufacturer will make great claims. I may even have research to back up those claims, but that research needs to be challenged too, because people need the right thing and they need the best thing that can be got. So what is the role of wearables? More like, so the Empatica, the other epilepsy-specific devices, or general wearables. What can they measure that's useful? So I've lots of things up here, from heart rate, quality of sleep, ECG, falls detection. So there's lots of things that can be measured by relatively cheap wearables. So what can we get from what's there in the market, and how can it help us? So there's three CE marked epilepsy wearables on the market in Europe, and lots of smartwatches. So there's the Empatica Embrace, there's EpiCare, and Nightwatch. They do different things. And then there's all the other wearables that we're familiar with. So I'm just going to mention some of these, but just by talking about them, it's not saying that anything is better than anything else. Unfortunately, what I'm going to say to you is how confusing it all is, but hopefully we can start working through that. So I had that ring of all the things that can be measured by wearables, and are they useful? Well, I can honestly tell you that you can take any one of those and you can look at do a literature search, Google Scholar, whatever, and you can say, is it important to measure sleep in epilepsy? Is it important to measure activity in epilepsy? What does heart rate in epilepsy say in terms of wearables? And you will find something that says they're all useful. But how do you put all that together? Other things that are really important and valuable, of course, is to pick up falls. But again, falls it's not an easy pickup. If somebody has a straightforward fall and they're wearing something that picks up a fall, that's great. But if they fall in such a way that the fall is broken physically, if I fell now and hit the table and then went down, I don't have a full-scale fall. So an Apple Watch with falls detection might not pick that up. I know for a fact that it doesn't, because I've been through an issue similar to that recently. So it can pick up, there's loads of wearables can pick up fast movement, and that's a great thing. My husband got into the car one day, his phone linked up with the speaker and the radio, and put out some hand sanitizer. It was during COVID, a whole load of it came out. So he did this with his hands, and then we got a phone call saying, emergency services, which service do you need? And it was because it picked up him doing that with his hands. So there's lots of, and he was just wearing just a smartwatch. So there's lots of things in the offing. There's lots of investment going in to wearables, and I think it's great if we can start to find ways to get the value out of that. So respiratory rate obviously is really important. That can be taken from, if a wearable measures the oxygen level, it can often infer the respiratory rate from that. And then there's electrodermal changes, where you get the device measures how much changes in temperature on the back of the watch, or change in increase in sweat. So it can, it sees a change in the skin. And then heart rate variability, which is, there's lots of things written up about this. It's a really interesting thing. It's a surrogate for stress, but everybody measures it a different way. So just some examples of just some features from wearables. The Empatica Embrace looks at heart rate, it looks at sleep, and it has falls detection. It has an accelerometer, so it picks up movement and where you are, and it picks up electrodermal activity. And it puts all those together into an algorithm, and it decides, is this a seizure or no seizure? So then you've got all these other devices, and lots more than these, that pick up different things. But there's a few things just on that slide, like sleep. There's lots of things that measure the quality of sleep. The problem with it is that there is no standardized measure for sleep. So my device might say that I have a good night's sleep and I could wear a different device tomorrow night, and it might, or you could have several devices at the same time. They're measuring different things. Another thing that's heart rate variability is another one of those that's measured different ways by different devices, and even by different apps. But another thing that's just interesting here is one of those things was pulse oximetry and SpO2 and the oxygenation of the blood. And just when you start to get into the really reading the small print about it, you've got a Withing scan watch, which measures a lot of things and measures them very well. It has clinically validated oxygen saturation levels. So its SpO2 is clinically validated. It is CE marked for that. The Apple Watch has, it measures SpO2. However, it's not CE marked for it. And, you can make assumptions that these things are. The Samsung Galaxy Watch, same as the Apple Watch. It's not CE marked for SpO2. Now, that doesn't mean that its measure isn't very useful. Its measure may be useful, but it's not clinically validated for it. So there's loads and loads of small print, and it's really hard to read it. Now, the next few slides are a bit wordy, and they're just to highlight things. I'm not reading them or going through them, but again, it's kind of about all the small print. CE marking, people talk about, is it a licensed medical device? Is it a certified medical device? Well, really that just means, has it got the CE mark? And the CE marks really just tells you, does it do what it says on the label? So that's it, in accordance with the medical device regulations. But even that's really tricky, because there's a picture there of the CE mark that you'll see in things. And there's a picture beside it of the CE mark for China export. It's a little bit different, but they are not the same things. So you can buy something, cheap thing on the internet, and it might have the China export on it. That is not a CE mark. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't have it as well. I'm just saying this is complicated. So there are lots and lots of standards relating to medical devices about safety and performance, about the software and the algorithms. And John David has some level of expertise in this area, which is great, because this piece of research will incorporate all of that. But there's an awful lot of things to consider. Now, the CE mark, if it does conform with medical device regulations, it will also have already met all these international standards for things like safety, effectiveness and security in the implementation and use of connected medical devices, or medical device software cycle processes. So you, as a user, a consumer, want to know that the thing you've got is validated at some level, or it's not. But maybe it's still useful because you can afford it, or someone you know has used it and it's been valuable for them. So just some other things is that most devices depend on an app. So the real cleverness is actually what goes on in the algorithm or inside the app that might be in the phone. This world of the medical device regulations, apps are included, and they must be clinically validated. If they must have a CE mark if they make a medical claim. Software and apps in themselves may be medical devices, even if they're standalone. And that's a change that's come over the last few years in terms of European regulation of medical devices. And also some apps are made for other manufacturers' wearables. So you can get apps that will work easily with an Apple Watch, but it's not an Apple product, or that will work with a Samsung Watch, and they will give you more information. You've probably seen some of those apps as well on the app stores or Google Play Store. So many apps now communicate with the big players that you'll have on your phone, the Apple Health Kit or Google Health. And that's a good thing because this is a really fast developing area. So where you've got the smarts built into the application and just using the sensors built into the device. But this is a very dynamic world, it's a really dynamic space, and there's a real need for critical and regular review of the literature and what's on the market as well, because it's pretty market-driven stuff. So the advantages of wearables are they're always on, they give a big picture, they give a real-world picture. I often think, sleep analysis is a big thing for patients, particularly with respiratory issues or apnea, something like that. So in the past, people went to the sleep lab. They had a very unusual night's sleep compared to their daily routine, which may have involved going to the pub for a few drinks or staying at home for a few drinks and going to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning. And now they're going to a proper sleep lab, so they're going to bed early, very well behaved. That's not picking up their real world sleep. So apps, the wearable devices that fit in with the real world really reflect a closer picture to the real person. A really important thing is a person-specific baseline. So there's evidence, for example, fairly good evidence that wearables can pick up changes in heart rate that come from COVID onset. But if someone wears a wearable a lot of the time and they can see a sudden change in their heart rate, maybe it's COVID, maybe it's something else, but maybe it is actually something. But if someone has COVID and they have a Fitbit in the drawer that they never use, and then they want to see, well, am I coming out of my COVID or whatever, then it's no use putting it on then, because the algorithm doesn't really know you. Whereas if you wear one all the time, you can see changes that are relevant to you, and specifically you. So a lot about wearables, like if you're an advantage and disadvantages, they depend on the wearer, and depend how well engaged the wearer is with their app. Like you need to want to use it, and you need to look at the data and kind of get to know yourself in terms of the data, and that's not an easy thing. The disadvantages are, here we go. Who monitors? I'm ready. Who monitors the data? Who looks at it? Who cares about the data? How meaningful is it? Who calibrates it if that's necessary? And they're not part of the patient's hospital record, which can be a challenging thing. There's real-world considerations like battery life. There's no point in buying an Apple Watch if you use an Android phone. You've got to buy the right one. I'm going to skip. So who cares about all the data? The caregiver does. An important issue is that I think all the epilepsy-specific devices, they require a subscription, and that is, that's a very, very real issue. Because what is that? What are you really getting for that in terms of value for money? The patient, obviously valuable if they engage with it, and also the healthcare providers, but they need to know that. They need to know where the data comes from, what device it comes from. They need to know whose data it is, and they need to have it in a useful way. So all of that needs to be brought together. The person with epilepsy, the data, the healthcare provider. There's lots and lots of challenges, nearly there. The costs are that there's a real commitment to the cost to the person who wants to use wearables to help them with their epilepsy one way or another. They've got to commit to the wearable. Like you can wear it and not really, it might be useful anyway, but probably the more you get engaged with your own data, the better. You need to give permission to use the data, and you need to understand the data. But the benefits are that there's almost certainly keys to epilepsy triggers. That can be from a personal level, getting to know yourself, on a population level, if you're involved in a research project like this. The safety, because a device will alert the falls detection on an Apple Watch, will send your location. So there's safety there. There's reassurance to caregivers coming from something like that, and it's an objective way to measure interventions, which is a great thing. So just to go on to the conclusion, there is huge potential for wearables helping people with epilepsy, but there's a long way to go, and there are definitely pitfalls and risks with that, and I'd be happy to be part of anything going on to minimise those pitfalls and risks. Thank you.